words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. A few years ago, a friend of mine lost her beloved grandmother who raised her. Now, this loss came at a time when my friend was also dealing with a lot of turmoil in her life, and the combination threatened to overwhelm her. There wasn't much I could do to help her, except to sit with her and listen. And in that listening, she actually gave me the greater gift. She said, I keep hanging on to something my grandmother always said to me. She'd say, "Child, God never comes early and God never comes late, but rest assured, he comes." Now, there's a lot of wisdom in that saying, and it would also make a great caption for the story of the Old Testament patriarch and matriarch Abraham and Sarah. Last week, we read how God called Abraham and his wife Sarah to go to a new land. God also promised to bless them for their faith and obedience by giving them the land and many, many descendants. But as we discover in today's story, while we can trust God to keep the promises he makes, both the method and the timing for keeping those promises are his alone. This might frustrate us, but it could also make us laugh. Today's reading begins many years after God first made those promises to Abraham and Sarah. During the intervening years, God repeated those promises of land and offspring to Abraham on several occasions, but very little changed. Abraham continued to do battle with the many tribes and kings in the land of Canaan, and still couldn't fully claim the land as his. And as for offspring, well, God's promise of many children must have always seemed strange to Abraham and Sarah, because one of the first things we learn about the couple is that they're barren. So where are all these descendants are going to come from? Abraham and Sarah try to give God an assist by having Abraham father a child with Sarah's slave girl Hagar. But God is clear that Hagar's child, Ishmael, is not the child that God promised. So the years go by, Abraham and Sarah keep getting older, and the promise of descendants seems more and more unlikely. But in the story that comes just before this morning's story, God tells Abram again that he and Sarah will have a child within a year. And Abram's response to that? He falls on his face and laughs out loud. All of this and much more leads to this morning's story, and this time someone else is laughing. Abraham is sitting under a grove of oak trees when he sees three strangers approaching. Now, he seems to know that they're not ordinary strangers, because while it was customary to offer hospitality of water and a bit of food to travelers, Abram goes above and beyond what was customary to host these guests. As fast as his 100-year-old legs could carry him, he runs to greet them. Then he runs to the tent to tell Sarah to make fresh bread. Then he runs to the herd to get them the best meat in the house. Then finally, the feast is set before them. And one of the strangers asks, "Where's your wife, Sarah?" Well, Sarah was back in the tent where wives were supposed to be. But wait a minute, why does that matter? And how do you know her name? Well, it matters because the strangers have a message that both Abram and Sarah need to hear. Now, all this time, Sarah has been eavesdropping on the conversation from just inside the tent. So she hears the message. "I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife Sarah shall have a son." And Sarah's response? She laughs to herself and says, "After I've grown old and my husband is old, shall I have pleasure? A child at my age? Impossible. Unbelievable. No, God, you are way too late this time." Now, some people criticize Sarah for laughing, as showing kind of having little faith in what God can do. But please keep in mind that Abram had exactly the same reaction when he heard the news, right? I mean, if you were in Sarah's place, wouldn't you laugh? Maybe I'd cry. I don't know. Here you are, 99 years old, your husband is 99, and some stranger tells you that you're going to have a baby. I mean, sometimes laughing seems like the appropriate response to a situation that seems laughably impossible. But I've always wondered, what did Sarah's laugh sound like? I mean, was it a derisive snort at the ridiculous impossibility of it all? Was it a chuckle of delight at the renewal of hope? Or maybe a nervous giggle wondering, what is going on here? It seems the stranger isn't even sure, so he asks, why did Sarah laugh? Sarah, are you afraid? Doubtful? Excited? Maybe all of the above? Then the Lord asks this question, is anything too wonderful for the Lord? Can God fulfill God's promises despite the facts on the ground? Sarah and Abraham don't seem to believe it. In fact, Sarah, forgetting that she's not supposed to be listening at the to the conversation, says from behind the tent entrance, "I did not laugh." And the Lord, with, I imagine, a twinkle in the eye and a chuckle at the divine absurdity of it all, says, "Oh yes, you did laugh." Now, what happens next to Sarah and Abraham seems laughably impossible, but it was well within the realm of possibility for God. In due season, the Lord dealt with Sarah as he had promised, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. And when Isaac, the child whose name means laughter, was born, he was right on time. God's time, that is, and according to God's promise. Is anything too wonderful for God? Now, I haven't learned all the details yet, and if I get some of this wrong, I'm sure you guys will correct me, but I understand that not too long ago, the future of St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Gardner was looking laughably impossible. Am I wrong?
What?
The priest you were sharing with another congregation retired. Your financial resources and the clergy shortage were making hiring another priest challenging. And then there was COVID. At one point, I've been told, you were down to 17 people in the pews on Sunday morning. Looks a little different today, doesn't it? A future for your beloved community must have seemed laughably impossible. In that gotta laugh to keep from crying way. And yet, when I came here church shopping less than a year ago, I didn't find a church on the verge of closure. Rather, I discovered a warm, welcoming, joy-filled, mission-focused community, brimming with life and energy and a desire to serve the community. So what happened? Now, I know that some of you are going to say, oh, Father Tim and Jenny happened. And you'd be right, because good leadership is really important. But that's not the whole story. There was a financial windfall that didn't come early and didn't come late, but rather came in God's time. And then there was you, small as your numbers were, keeping the faith. And then there was God, who knows a thing or two about resurrection and new life. Is anything too wonderful for God? Maybe you're facing a laughably impossible situation today. Something so difficult or so awesome that you can't imagine how God expects you to get through it or do it. Remember, after Sarah laughed, the stranger restated his promise to Abram. Sarah shall have a son. God did not let Sarah's reaction or the visible circumstances thwart the call or the promise. My friends, be sure, if God has called you to it, God will get you through it. I encourage you to give birth to God's dream for your life, for the life of the church, and for the life of the world. And be prepared to laugh at how it happens. Amen.
Amen.
Please join me in the Nicene Creed. We believe in one God,